Welcome to Exploring Product, everyone. Super excited today. I am Ryan Hatch with my co-host, Rob. And we are super excited today to have Ramli John on. Ramli John is the author of Product-Led Onboarding. I'll be sharing key insights from his brand new book. Welcome, Ramli.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, Rob. Super excited to be here. I love geeking about product, and this is going to be super fun.
Come to the right place.
Yeah, man. So we're gonna talk today about what most SaaS companies get wrong with onboarding and why that's so critical. And we're also going to talk about what success looks like. Dive into some really great examples that Ramli's brought along with how he works with clients, how the framework that he suggests that you can use in your startups to get your onboarding really on track. So excited to unpack this together. Let's do it.
Sure.
So let's start off with why this book, right? Let's start out with your motivation for this thing. You talk a little bit about that and what most companies get wrong.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of motivation for the book, it just amazes me how often onboarding or user onboarding is forgotten as a critical part of the customer journey or growth of a product. I mean, there's data that backs that really onboarding sets up users for success, and for success, typically the definition for a lot of software that is occurring is retention. There's data from ProductLed that came out 2 years ago. They studied over 500 different types of products, and they found across the board from 3, 6 week to 9 week retention, those users that experience a positive onboarding experience really does stick around a lot longer. It's 2 to 3 times higher retention. And once again, if you're SaaS, that retention results in higher revenue and higher referral. It all stems out from that key retention. There's also a study from Matrix Partners where one of their partners found that one of the leading causes for churn or for a user or a customer leaving a product is, first of all, when the key person who brought the product onto the company leaves. That's the first one. The second one, he said, is improperly onboarding new users to the product. So it's so critical, but often it's forgotten. I even think about, I'm looking at books right now on Amazon around onboarding, and I could barely find any. I can barely find one around using. Usually when you type onboarding, the first thing is about employee onboarding and not really related to product onboarding. And I know only 2 other books that really focus on onboarding. This one by Samuel Ulick, the elements of amazing onboarding. He's this amazing expert on onboarding and UX. And the other one is called Better Onboarding that just came out as well. But really there's this gap that I'm seeing and how critical onboarding is for companies, that there's not enough people who are talking about it or really digging into how to improve it. In terms of mistakes, that was the second part to that question. I think the reason why onboarding is often forgotten, I often call it the ugly duckling of growth, because you got the marketing and sales. They're super focused on trying to get more sales and users at the front of the door. And you got the product. Usually they're focused on delivering the product roadmap and new features. They forgot about this middle ground, and it's left alone. And usually the 2 mistakes that I've seen, first of all, the first one is around neglecting it and just dropping users right in the product without any kind of direction. There's this saying that I say that a lost user is a gone user. That means that if a user gets lost, that they don't know where to go, it's time to leave. Confusion is one of the things you want to avoid for people who are dropping into a new product. So that's the first one. It's just neglecting it. The second one, on the other hand of neglecting it, is putting too much and overwhelming users, where you're just pop-ups here. I'm not sure if either of you have signed up for something where you're bombarded by pop-ups, product tours, Ryan, check this out. Rob, check out this button.
Too often.
And it's exactly right. And they point out every single thing. And the thing, that the analogy I use for this is, imagine going to a grocery store and then somebody just grabbing your hand, and you're like, hey Ryan, here's where the chicken is, here's where the bread is, here's where the toilet paper is. And you're like, 1 second, why are you showing me this? I'm just here for the chocolate bar. I'm just hungry, man. Why are you showing me every single thing?
At my grocery store, well, maybe not to show you where the chicken's at. At my grocery store, I have to hide from the cable companies set up desks as soon as I walk in the door, and they try and get me in of like, what do you have for your cable company? Like, do you have HD channels? Like, no, I'm just make my way to the produce, like hide from it.
Right away. I do this. I do the same I do the same all the time. And I think that's two mistakes I see often is either it's too empty or to your point, Rob, like it's just like you're trying to run away from the product because it just points out everything.
So Ramli, I have a question. You said, in why you wrote this book, like you went looking for it. Were you looking for it from the angle of like better activation and onboarding, or was it for retention purposes? Like obviously you already have this experience, but maybe to like shape a specific project you were working on. I don't know if that brings you back to like what got you into the search in the first place.
I think first I was like, hey, our onboarding needs some love, and I needed to sell this up to back then my managers. Like, why is onboarding important? And that's when I started getting data around like how critical it is to a lot of different things. Like, and really, I think that's like that. I liken it to like a first date or a job. Like both of you are big fans of jobs to be done, right? Onboarding. If jobs to be done is the end goal, the onboarding is the job interview. Really, like you got to really nail that job interview, and that first impression is super critical. There's I forget where that stat is that within 5 seconds, like people have made up the mind whether they like somebody or not. Like, sure, we can push that off, but that's our like maybe instinct, our evolutionary instinct to like, hey, within 5 seconds, do I like this person? Do I want to hang out there, or are they gonna try to stab me in the back? I think it's the same thing for products, because there's so many products out there. And we have as people, we have very, very little limited time and we're going to make snap decisions. And those snap decisions typically stick with us, whether we're going to love a product or not within those first few minutes that we spend with that product.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, so most companies get two things wrong: either neglecting, where they just kind of drop them in the middle of the jungle, if you will, and just go, good luck, right? Or they're just constantly tapping them with a whole bunch of things, and they're just overwhelmed. Yeah, no, that makes tons of sense. And I wonder, on the flip side of that, what does good onboarding look like in a way that, like, if you were to do an audit of somebody,
right,
how would you know if they're good or bad? Like, how would you kind of like, what would you look for? You know what I mean?
For sure. I guess I can approach this from two different angles. The first is like, I'm just external and I don't have access to the data. I think you kind of sense that something is good when it has a clear sense of purpose. And what I mean by that is they have a good, very strong idea of why their product is valuable and what is it that first they try to get you to that beachhead or to that one thing to get you to stick to it. And an example I like bringing up is around Calendly. Calendly is this easy way to book meetings with somebody. And when you sign up for it, they do it step by step. First of all, the first thing they try to get you to do is connect to Google Calendar. So once you have that, now they have access to that. The second thing they do is they don't want you to send that Calendly link to a podcast guest or a sales lead, because that's too risky. The first thing they try to do to get you to do is book a test meeting with yourself. So I think that just there's a sense of purpose, but also they're trying to de-risk it slowly but surely, so that, hey, okay, this is what it looks like when I send it to Ryan or Rob or to somebody else, so that when you send out the link, you're not embarrassed, right? So when you do finally send it out, like you know it works and you know what to expect from it. So I think that's when it's clear, the first product action, and that's what the only thing they focus on. They don't talk about, well, if you connect your Stripe, you can get paid with Calendly. Well, if you have a lot of salespeople, then you can have multiple. No, that's not the first thing they focus on, even though that's probably valuable later down the road. But they focus on just getting you to use that one key thing. For Calendly, it's getting you to book a meeting with yourself. I think that's what I would do if I was external. If like, is there a purpose here and they're really driving towards that instead of like being distracted with other things? The second is if I'm really inside and like I get access to their data, would be like a good measure of success is seeing them now seeing the number of people who are signing up and completing that first key product action. And once again, in Calendly, how many people are actually signing up and getting to book a meeting with themselves to test it out? And how long does it take them to do that? And then finally, how long does it take them to actually send it out to another person, whether there's somebody internal in the company or to a lead or to a podcast guest? And you're really like trying to find that time, like how long it takes for them to see the value of the product, and then just seeing if there's really improvements into getting them to see that value sooner. So that's one metric that I would really look at, would be something called time to value, or the time it takes for people to see the value, and the percentage of new users that actually complete and accomplish that key product action would be like some kind of metrics that I would definitely look at.
When you're that metric's super interesting. What do you look for? And it might depend on the context of products, and maybe some examples pop in your mind. But like, what is a good time to value, right? Are we talking like seconds and minutes to get to something, days and weeks? Like, and I don't know. Take me into maybe an example that you've come across that makes sense there.
Yeah, there's this, actually that's a really interesting question around time to value, because often the advice people give is just shorten your time to value as quickly as possible. But the problem with that advice is that when you're trying to learn something, if they rush you through it, you're not going to retain any new information. For example, if somebody's trying to teach you how to play the piano for the first time, and they're like, okay, here's A, here's C. That's all you know now. The only thing you know how to play is Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, and you can't play anything else. You don't know why you're doing that. It's not going to be very helpful. So there is a study actually by Inner Trends. They're like this data company where they found that they reduced their time to value to like 2 to 3 minutes, and they found that they're actually losing more users because they've reduced it too little, that people are not really getting it. They're rushing them through teaching them. So they actually had to increase their time to value to 5 to 6 minutes to really get them to kind of learn how to use the product. And there's this blog from their CEO, Claudio, that I have to find and dig up, that really shares this really interesting information. That it's the whole point of this is like, you want to optimize time to value, not for people to experience that value, but for people to stick around. You're optimizing for retention again. So like if it takes 6 minutes for somebody, a time to value for somebody to stick around 10 weeks after, then that's totally fine, versus like trying to push it to 3 seconds and then everybody just get confused and they totally leave for that. So
interesting.
To your answer, it really does depend, and you need to your team needs to optimize and figure out like look at the cohorts and like look at the different users based on the time to value for each one.
So what I almost hear, and tell me where I'm way off base, but from the first concept you introduced of like finding the first bit of progress, and what I heard was almost micro progress. What's the first small thing you can do to get you on that journey? You have to balance that with time to value. You can't cram it all in. And so those two like key points is really kind of the fine tuning across those. Does that sound like fair in those two key things to think about?
100%. Yeah, you definitely want to get the quick win first, but like and then like getting them to the full value of your product can take a few minutes to like really set up everything.
So perfect. Interesting, because it's almost like, and we know this intuitively. Like the reason my product is hard is because it's not just a science. Like it's not just reduced time to value to minimize it completely. It's actually an art, right? It's like it's a dance with the customer on what's too little information, what's too much information,
right?
What's just enough to bring them along that they stay engaged. Yeah. I love the example of the Calendly, because like booking with yourself, like because you're getting to see like both. Calendly, you're not the only person involved. Like it's you and whoever you're inviting. And I like that it actually gives you a perspective of the other side of the table, and lets you kind of like walk around the experience to understand what the other person sees too.
100%. And I love what you said, that this is more of an art, right? Like it really is like whenever somebody is like, oh, here's a silver bullet to improve your onboarding, just do product tours or just do this.
Yeah.
I'm like that, like the consultant and most people are the smart. I wouldn't know how to say, but it depends. It depends on your users. It depends on your product. It depends on like exactly what you need. And sometimes things that we think are friction, I think that's the thing, is like things that we think are friction is actually quote unquote good friction in the onboarding, because that's actually helping users to learn something. Because think about any kind of learning, it requires some kind of friction. Like once again, going back to the piano example, if you've never played piano before and you want to become a grandmaster pianist, like you need friction. You need to struggle. You need to struggle a little bit for that. And I think finding the balance with the struggle with them, like, oh, I'm done with piano, I hate it. Like same thing with your product, like finding that balance with the good friction with like friction that gets people annoyed is definitely more of an art than it is science.
I love that concept, like good friction. It sounds really negative. Where my mind goes, like especially in terms of jobs, is almost like you're talking about the emotional aspect of it a little bit, of like how am I supposed to feel going through these things? And it can't be this rainbow journey that everything's perfect. Like you need, like, we're human, right? We're going to experience like emotions even in a good onboarding experience. And so when you say that, that's what triggers me, is like, how should you feel knowing that you're trying something completely new to get to some destination at the end? But I've never heard it put that way. So it's super interesting.
Sure.
Yeah, and what this is really bringing up for me is like, you mentioned the outside view and the inside view, right? If you're going to go do an audit, you look at the actual customer experience themselves. What's it like to go through the experience as a customer? And then, kind of like more macro inside the company, what's my funnel look like? What are people dropping off? And what's the analytics look like?
Yeah.
But, we all know that looking at the data tells you what's happening, but not why. And so I'm really interested, and we'll get to an example in a second, but maybe you could just give us some insight now about, it really feels like the only way we talk about an art and like it's dance with the customer and time to value too early, or I'm going to give up because this is too frustrating, but it was just difficult enough that I learned something and I'm willing to come back for the next piano lesson.
Right.
What this is reinforcing for me is that continuous discovery, right? Like you're going to need to get back to qualitative interviews to figure out how they're feeling in the onboard. And I'm really curious on strategies you've used to do that. And actually, especially strangers, where you actually like, this isn't B2B where you have, it's like they don't know you from Adam basically, and they're going through your experience. And how have you got an insight on that first couple seconds?
Right.
Can you first couple of minutes, can you talk about how you've done continuous discovery and gotten key insights and how you've gotten them?
Yeah. I'm definitely a big fan of what you were just talking about, like definitely talking to customers and like finding out that, Rob, to your point as well, about the emotional journey, the success, and really figuring that out. An example that I found, and this is something that I've heard from Andrew Kaplan. He used to lead growth at Wistia as well as Postscript, and now he's like a founder of Delivering Value, helping like growth teams out. It's like one simple way, and it's quite surprising how simple it sounds, but it's actually brought them a lot of insights, particularly to this is what the same tactic he did at Wistia, this video video platform that a lot of people use when he was leading growth there to improve their onboarding. He just did a little pop-up survey when people log in for the first time, and he just asked a simple question: what are you trying to achieve, or what is your goal today with Wistia? And he got a ton of insight, particularly who they are and what they're trying to achieve, and even like with 1 word or 2 words, exactly what they're trying to achieve with Wistia, and that product was super insightful, because what they did next to really improve their onboarding is they found that like the top 3 reasons why somebody signs up for Wistia, and they started segmenting their onboarding. So they would show a different kind of product tour, they would highlight different kind of features, they would change up their onboarding emails based on exactly why you chose that first question. What are you doing here today with Wistia? And I think that's just something that's so key and insightful. is going to the why and go and speaking in the jobs to be done term, the customer job. Like, what is the job that they're trying to do with that? Whether they're just trying to generate more leads with videos, or are they trying to showcase their brand with that video? Whatever that job is, then you can start highlighting and features and emotional stuff based on that particular one. So I think that was such a simple thing that I've been really seeing a lot of. I've been suggesting to other people that they're getting a lot of insights out of that as well. Just a simple pop-up survey that you can use, something like Hotjar or some other kind of survey tool that like shows up right when people signs up, and figuring out exactly why somebody's signing up with it without like getting into it. And once you have that answer, maybe you can even go deeper and ask them for an interview based on that. Oh, it's like, oh, I noticed, hey, Ryan, I noticed you said that you're using videos to generate more leads. Can I talk a little bit with you about that for like 10, 15 minutes just to dig deeper into that? So I think it's a segue to a further conversation. So now you know who exactly is open to a discussion versus people who are just like, oh, I'm going to ignore the survey.
Brilliant. No, data to inform the qualitative discussions. Great. Like that's money to us, like music to our ears in terms of like understanding context around the situation and the job, but then going and validating that and just talking through it with a potential customer. Ramli, I know you have like a framework. And so I'd really love to kind of get into it. One of the things we do on Exploring Product is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. So I want to hear about your approach. I know you have something kind of to share in that, and then maybe we can open it up into a case study to kind of apply that.
Sure. Yeah, let me just share this over. Oh, perfect. That was easy.
Right.
So yeah, there's this framework that we use called the bowling alley framework. This is something that Wes Bush actually created. And if people are interested in checking it out, it's productled.com/exploring-product. And essentially in a bowling alley, your goal is to hit strike, which is hitting all the pins, this white thing at the end of this lane. And getting that strike is all about getting that win. Going back to Calendly, the first strike is getting a meeting booked with somebody else for the first time. And in bowling, you have the current state and you want to roll it down straight down to getting that first strike. In this framework, the straight line onboarding is like the minimum number of steps that people need to take, the minimum number of things they have to do, or minimum number of features they have to learn to achieve that desired outcome or first strike. And there's a few things that you need to do to achieve that. I mean, the first one, we've already been talking all about this for both Rob and Ryan. Like, we're talking about like really understanding what success is for the users, understanding what we talked about, that emotion. What is that functional? What is that social job that people are trying to accomplish? Often this is where things go wrong. The reason why is people just jump into like, hey, let's just implement a product tour. But if you don't have a clear purpose, you don't have a clear idea of what success is for users, is like going on a road trip and not knowing where you're going to go. Like, it just doesn't make sense. You're going to waste a ton of gas. You're going to waste a ton of food. You're going to waste a ton of resources if you don't know where you're going with that. And going back to what we just talked about just now about like using surveys, talking to your customers, this is super, super critical. If you miss a step, everything else in the next steps will really not work out as well. Once you do that, like what we do is we ask you to map out your current journey. So you can use like Trello or some other things. Like right now we're using Miro or Mural, or even like just a whiteboard. That's definitely something people can use. And what we suggest is like, what I suggest would be every single field or button click or every single thing that a user has to do would be a Post-it note in Miro, or it could be like a card in Trello. And we'll see exactly why that's super, super critical. Once you do that, we have this system that I use, red, yellow, and green kind of system for every single step that you have in your onboarding that you've just mapped out in the previous step. What you want to do is mark it, first of all, by yourself, and then ask your team to do it as well. And if you have data, you want to be using this here as well, and based on insights from users. But green are those steps that are absolutely mission critical for users to see or experience, or to go through to really experience that success that we talked about in step one. Yellow is ones that you can delay after they achieve that first success. And red are just ones that are just, these are bad friction. These are ones that you really need to chop off, and it's time to let it go. And once you have that, you want to go with your team together and just discuss this. I think this is where it gets interesting, is somebody from sales, for teams that have a sales team might say, hey, you said that phone number or that thing that you said that field is not necessary, but our sales team actually really uses it, and I believe it's green. So there's now this healthy conversation with your product, with engineering, with design, and with your marketing and sales, to really discussing what are the mission critical fields that users need to see to achieve success, and for you to help them out achieve that success particularly. And that's your straight line onboarding once you gather all the green ones with that. So that's just a simple framework that you guys have any questions before I just do a sample where we go through this?
I think the sample would be great. In my mind, what comes to so having worked around kind of UI and UX, just in product concepts, the one piece that I feel like would come up running this exercise, so I'm curious how you might combat this hypothetical situation, is everyone thinks every part is critical or required.
Right.
Like, how do you approach that? Where it comes up in our work all the time is when we're looking at features. So it's right. I'm trying to make that analogy where it's like, no, we have to have that, or it's we must have that. What's the sort of criteria, or how do you coach around that to really let them know that no, it's not required? And I have some thoughts, but I kind of want to hear openly where you go. We'll take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely a challenge that could come up. What I usually suggest to teams in that scenario is really go into if you have data, go through which ones are where people are getting stuck, and if you have insights. If it is mission critical, back it up with insights from users, and you're are there some insights there, particularly that people can share and show up to that part? And if not, then is there small experiments that you can show? Hey, this is absolutely mission critical for people to go through, and then if people don't, then that's totally fine. What I do find is most people, when they go through this, I suggest to them that not every step is mission critical. So they need to mark at least a few red, if that's the case. Sure. So I mean, that's usually what happens. Is what I suggest with them. It's a great question.
That makes perfect sense. What it puts in my mind is back to what you said of what is that first success, right? When we opened up the conversation, and so my mind even goes into time, right?
Right.
Almost time box. The person or user is not going to spend all day onboarding, right? And so maybe almost create, and it's exactly what you said, just kind of inverse. It's you have to mark some red. Well, you can only pick 7 of the 10 cards that are out here, right? Just kind of framing it a different way. But that makes sense. Thanks for that.
I'm curious what your response is to that. When everybody's oh, all of these features are mandatory. How do you guys approach that scenario where everybody thinks every feature is a must-have, not nice?
Yeah, it's such a. It's funny. You're throwing my same question back, so I appreciate it. And also, damn, that's a hard question. For us, I think it's first things first, right? So we like to think almost chronologically in terms of, I guess, value, and we weigh it. We think of it in terms of need and jobs to be done. So if we really get to a point where we have to make trade-offs, we go right back, almost what you said, go back to the data, go back to the user information that we have. The other reality that often we get working with startups, we don't know the perfect answer. So we have to pick one. And so we'll force ourselves to pick one and then go in with an experimentation mindset saying, hey, this is a two-door decision where we can always come back and change our minds. So we know it's this imperfect science where we might have to learn more going forward.
I like it. Doing little experiments to figure out hey, was this even helpful? Do people find this annoying?
Absolutely.
Yeah, this is a great. This is a seeing even your framework just sparks some thoughts for me, because I wonder this is stuff that nobody thinks about. I think you kind of evidenced that, right, by the only onboarding book you could find was for employee onboarding. It's when we talk to founders, it's always about the product. It's almost never about the customer and their job to be done, right?
Right.
And so what that, naturally lends itself to is features, talking about, I got to have all these features, and it becomes a conversation of what features are most important. And sure. But I wonder here, I almost wonder, like, if you're approaching a product from ground zero, I see a lot of times, like I can see right here, and maybe you're in your example, but I think a lot of founders naturally would build the product first. That's their inclination. What? Because they're afraid that they have to have everything polished before they go talk to a customer, right? They have to have something built. And then I think then they would go back to onboarding when they actually try to get your first customers on and bumpy road. My question for you is, like, does it make sense to do some core features and come back, or is it the inverse? Is it like I'm only gonna work on building like the first minute, the first 2 minutes,
right?
And then go from there. Like, what are your thoughts on, how this when you're launching a company from zero? How much thought you put into onboarding, and is that the only thing you do, or do you get some core features plus that? Like, can you talk about what your thoughts are?
Man, let's talk about art. That's a really tough question on its own as well. I mean, for sure, there are some thoughts around, you want to make sure, and this is something that I've heard as well, and I don't necessarily know how I completely feel about this, is like, you need to have a lot of people, need to have enough users signing up for you to start thinking about onboarding. But in my view, like, that's kind of wasted resources, like, where the initial marketing effort, the initial effort you have to signing up, whether that's launching on Product-Led or other places, or like, how do you acquire your first few users when you're just either dropping them in there or overwhelming? So I'm of the camp that as you add the features, that you're thinking about how do I guide my users through this, where I'm not necessarily overwhelming them with all of these things. And going back to like that jobs to be done, like, what is, if I have like, let's just say I have 10 features, what is that first feature or first 2 features that I need to introduce to them in this first 5 minutes, instead of like trying to introduce them to all 10? Because there's this concept called like Hick's law. It's a psychological framework or law around, like, if you introduce more than 7 or 8 things to a person, it takes them exponentially longer to make a decision, right? So an example is when you go to a burger place and there's only a burger or a hot dog, you're gonna make that decision really quickly. When you have like burger, pizza, hot dog, you got sundaes, you got like shawarma, like, you're gonna stare at there like, what do I want? And the longer it takes for somebody to make that decision, the more likely they are to be like, screw this, I don't want anything anymore, I'm just gonna go to Domino's or something, or like to Burger King to get a burger. So I think it goes back to that, like, as you're adding on feature, I would suggest to have already an idea of like, what is that ideal flow of, like, logical flow, like, oh, let's introduce them to, going back to Calendly, let's first introduce them to getting a meeting booked with themselves before we introduce them to, well, you can sync Stripe to your Calendly so that you can get paid as a consultant. Oh, if you have 10 salespeople, you can have a round robin account with Calendly so that you can get more things. So like, Calendly has so many features, but they know that 1 or 2 things first that they want to get them on. And that's what I would suggest would be like, hey, like, if you're starting to build on features, find that first one. And if that's the one that gets people excited, then the other one is the add-ons.
Yeah. 2 things stood out to me. We just said there is this threshold of users you have to have before you can really make kind of this onboarding, kind of that combination of art and science. So that resonates to us, because sometimes we work with entrepreneurs that are like, they're fighting to get their first few customers, which there's aspects of onboarding that they need to address, but they're looking for the early adopters that are going to be a bit more on the bleeding edge. And that's the second thing, is when you talk about addressing those key things you want to introduce, what I heard is you almost, once you have that threshold, you're like, this onboarding piece solves for the the first followers, not the
Right.
ones that are going to be in there in the weeds where it's kind of half broken and they had to like
Right.
find their way into your product. But these are the ones that need a little bit of hand holding. So that
Right.
really, really resonated with me, Ramli, and how you, and
Interesting.
where this even fits for entrepreneurs that either are listening to this or even that we work with Ryan for how we might approach this.
I think that's a good point around, and I think that's going towards like the idea of early adopters, where like you can have the absolutely worst quote unquote onboarding experience where you have a ton of friction, but if somebody's motivation is super high, where like whether that motivation comes from my current situation really, really sucks. It is the worst experience I've had.
Yeah.
Or that motivation comes from, oh, I'm interested in NFTs and it's super cool. I want to be one of the cool kids. Or whatever that motivation comes from. I want to be part of the in crowd. If the motivation is high enough, then you can overcome any kind of friction there. There's actually this other framework that is called the BJ Fogg framework, where it actually really talks about that. Like to change somebody's behavior, there's three components to it, according to this doctor of behavior change from Stanford. And he said that it's the first one is motivation, the second one is ability, how hard or easy it is for somebody to do something, would be somebody to adopt a new habit or change in behavior. And the last one is around prompts. Like when you have like prompts like reminders or like alarms or things like that get people towards that change of behavior, then it really does help out. And he's applied this to like more of habit change for people, like so that they can build good habits. But I've actually see that it really works well with people who are adopting new products as well. Like whether can you increase motivation? Can you make it easier for people? Or do you have enough prompts inside or outside your product that can help people to guide through that?
Interesting. And it sounds like the good onboarding. Oh, sorry, Ryan. It sounds like the good onboarding solves for the latter two of like, you're not going to solve for motivation, but you can solve for ability and prompts through a better initial experience is the way I kind of think about it.
I would say that there is certain, and this goes back to, I think we're talking about jobs to be done. Is there a way that you can keep bringing that up? What is that end outcome they have for somebody? What kind of emotion are they going to achieve once they get to that end state? An example I can think about I keep going back to Calendly, and I'm not sponsored by Calendly at all here. But like you're talking about, but you're talking about removing frustration from going back and forth by meetings, or looking professional in front of your peers could be another one, another end emotion or an outcome or jobs to be done somebody's trying to accomplish. Like a classic example that I've seen spammers, well, let's say like gym, when you're signing for a fitness club, like they try to show you with that nice fit body, like to focus on that. Like, okay, I imagine now myself, like Ramli, next summer, I'm going to have 8 packs, not even 6. And you just have that imagery in your mind, right? That's the same thing for products. Is like, how can you paint that picture of that end success when they're going through like rough times? Like, oh man, this part of this onboarding sucks, or like I'm getting through it. Like if you painted that picture really clearly from the get-go with your copy or your images on your landing pages or even in your ad campaigns, then it does help increase that motivation even before they sign up for the product and go through the experience.
This is really interesting. This is great. I think we'll get to your example in one moment here. We're excited to unpack that with you. But what we're talking about right now is actually
Brian, you might be on mute.
No, I'm not on mute.
You're not. Okay, you were coming through for me. I hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Sorry if my headset's having problems. I think the question is, like, as an entrepreneur, I have so many things to do, right? I'm so overwhelmed. It's hard to know what to do now, what to do later. And the question kind of becomes like, hey, when do I, thinking about customer segmentation and stage of my company and like, pre-revenue, first customers, like, or first followers, I'm just thinking about when, as an entrepreneur, should I focus on onboarding? Thinking about, like you talked about, maybe it's these early adopters that are that are really, really motivated. Their arms on fire, like, right? They're gonna go to the gym because I don't know. There's some big event coming up. They're gonna go on a big adventure. They're gonna climb Everest or something. It's like I need to prep. Where there's crunch there's high motivation. And even if I can't get to the gym, I'm gonna lift logs in my backyard or something. It's like anything it takes, versus someone who's kind of like couch potato who just needs some prodding. Or do you know what I mean? Like, is there early on in a venture, if you're targeting early adopters first, who are aware of the problem, who are already trying to solve it, who are gonna crawl on their hands and knees to get to something that you're offering, if it truly is 10 times better.
Right.
They don't need as much hand holding, right? And it feels like the onboarding stuff is the stage after you get your first 10, 15, 20, 50, maybe 100, then it's time to really focus on this.
That's a good rule.
That or no?
Yeah, I think I would say that's a good rule of thumb. I think the first thing I would really focus on if I was an early stage founder is really nailing down my positioning and like getting people I'm going to use the word excited, but getting people like to understand exactly the problem and that they're facing with what is the problem with the current situation, and why is the new scenario that you're creating with your product going to be, to your words, 10 times better? Why is it like going to make their lives easier? I think that's like, if you nail that, like that's going to solve a ton of problems, not just around onboarding. It's going to solve a ton of problems around sales and marketing. Going to solve a ton of problems around your product roadmap, because now you're hyper focused on that particular scenario that you're trying to solve for. I think that's really what once I've really nailed down my product positioning is when you can like throw more resources around onboarding and like scaling up your offering, and even like trying to get more people to sign up for your users, because like that does help a ton. And it's something that I've really talked about as well. It's like, if a lot of onboarding issues is a lack of clarity around your positioning, around your offering, and exactly what you're trying to do with your product and how you're helping people with that.
Wonderful. Awesome. With that, let's jump into your example, man.
Yeah. Sure. I mean, this is just an example of what I would go through with a client. If I was going to go through with an onboarding experience, I would break it down step by step like this, where once again, like I'm putting down a Post-it note for every single thing that a user needs to do to achieve success. In terms of Canva, for people who are not familiar with it, it's an easy way to create like logos, business cards, any kind of design work that you need. You can make it because they have templates for it, and you don't need to have Photoshop skills at all or design skills because they have templates. So what I would go through would be just like mark down the steps a user would need to take right from the beginning. So first one, somebody needs to click on sign up here on the homepage. After they click on sign up, I prefer to click sign up with email. So there's like, if I zoom in here a little bit, I know it's a little dark here. So like it says sign up with email. I'm going to create a Post-it note for that here. And when somebody signs up, they're presented with 3 fields and 1 button click. So I'm actually going to use Post-it notes once again for every single one of these. Enter name, enter email, enter password, click get started, and go forward from there. So once again, every field you want to be able to write that down to make sure that you can have a healthy discussion with your team. Do we really need that? Do we really need that phone number? Do we really need that other field, especially for more complex B2B products where you need a ton of information sometimes to sign up for something? Then that does get that conversation going, because what you want to do is what you want to do with that is you want to be able to evaluate that with your team with the red, yellow, and green template that I have. So for example, here's the first one that I usually ask people here. It says here with Canva, as soon as you sign up with it, ask you, what will you be using Canva for? We'll use this to recommend designs, templates, especially for you. They say you're a teacher, you're a student, you're a personal, for your personal use, small business, large company, nonprofit, and charity. And usually what I ask people here, and the reason why is a lot of people trying to decide if this is useful at all would be, I would ask people, hey, is this something that's absolutely necessary for people to experience Canva's promise or their first success for users? Then you would mark R here. If it's yellow, something that they can delay after that success, or it's green if it's absolutely mission critical. So, I mean, that's exactly what, I mean, I'm curious for you guys, Ryan and Rob, like for this particular stuff in Canva, assuming we don't have any data, like if I had data, I was also absolutely working for Canva, I would go to the data to see if people are getting passes. But for the both of you, just based on this, do you think this is a G, mission critical? Why, if it's something that can be delayed, or R, it's something that can we need to chop off right away?
I think for me here, I go to why. Like my explaining my thinking is sort of, this is something that we, the company, if I'm working for Canva, sure, I want to know this so that I can maybe tee up a journey later on. But what am I, the user, getting out of this? Like, to me, it's an extra step for myself.
Okay. And then that's a good point, Ryan.
Well, we talked about the WISI example and capturing context early. Even on, like, we're redoing the Headway website right now, and we're talking about capturing context early so we can message to them specifically based on who they are, right? Do they not have a product yet at all? It's like pre-product, no pre-revenue, like launch, or is it someone who's like, Series A funded, who's actually got teams, or actually trying to figure out where they go next? I think those are different starting points.
Right.
Yeah, to Rob's point, like.
So you're saying green is a go. Who's the expert say?
I'm saying I don't know. These aren't jobs to be done to me either, right? These are just like who I am. I'm a person. I'm a teacher.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if that tells you much, but I think like capturing intent and capturing the idea of capturing a job to be done in context early could be helpful. Yes.
No, this is where this is exactly why this exercise is interesting, especially if you like I love Rob's explanation, and Ryan, like this is where like this exercise really does work out. I would say it depends on how they use this. I do go with both of you, but I know the end, and it could take a lot longer for us to go through. Let me give you the spoiler here. I'm gonna skip this one too, adding your team. So I chose small business here, and this is the thing that they did with Canva, was like based on your answer there, they actually gave you the popular designs based on that option. So in this case, they gave you, hey, Ramli, you said and I would probably design this a little bit better just to make that even clearer. Ramli, here are the popular designs for small businesses, and they give you Instagram posts, like logos, Facebook posts, Facebook cover, and then video. And then if you select any of the other options there, they give you different top designs. Knowing that now, it would be, for me, I'm starting to see.
Change my answer.
That's true.
This is great. Like,
exactly.
What I hear in this is like, this is the speed to value. And like, even though you had to slow me down for that half second early on, you got my speed to value is there, and the context is probably right, perhaps. But it's interesting to see the case study kind of come to life for how it might get debated live.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's exactly the case here. I think that they have thousands of designs, and going back to that thing I mentioned, the Hicks law, where if you show me 1,000 designs right now, I'll be like, I'm out of here. I don't know where to start. But they're limiting it to like 5 or 6 or 7 that they have for you. And that it makes it like, once again, I think it could have been designed a little bit better here to show that options. But to Rob's point, I think this is where that discussion comes in, especially more interesting if you have qualitative customer research data as well as quantitative data. Now you can be like, really like be brutal and say, hey man, this looks nice. Like, let's say this, like, hey, it looks like they're trying to add team members here. Do you really need this? Now you're actually really going through and finding out where you can chop things that it's not adding value, or delay things after the experience, that first success, so that you can get to it. I mean, we can go through this for another half an hour exactly, and exactly ask the same thing. But this is the exact same process I go through with any kind of onboarding experience. And if I do, like, once again, if I do have access to the data, then I would marry this experience with some kind of data with it.
Yeah, I think that is the like when you showed the first question, and you kind of like even gave us a tip, like you don't have data. Where it took me is like it told me what data I might start wanting to look for.
Interesting.
And I think for a lot of the folks we work with, like even having that is like the big lift versus even just figuring out what to put on the screen. The other thing that's sort of highlighted for me, Ramli, is like there is also this, I'm going to call it kind of the upper threshold. We talked about when user onboarding can start, especially for smaller entrepreneurs. And I look at Canva, that's now this sort of platform thing.
Right.
You know, in your experience, what does that threshold for segmentation look like with multiple journeys? Like maybe context dependent, but that's I saw here is like, wow, Canva can serve 6 different types of users in different ways. Is that a big challenge for folks? Do people know they want to be this big platform? Like what do you usually see?
I would definitely focus. Like focus is such a big thing, especially early on for early founders or entrepreneurs. I would definitely focus on just one experience and nailing that. And then the other stuff it comes later.
So glad you said that.
Yeah.
We coach on that all the time. And it's like, Ramli gets it. Like, cause you can't be scatterbrained until you have the traction to go there. Sorry to interrupt those. You're awesome.
No, I'm totally with you there. I think talking about scatterbrain, like you can have like, and I believe Jacob mentioned it earlier, you can like half-ass a bunch of different options here, but I think it's Ron Swanson, like you want to whole ass just one option there and like totally double down, make that absolutely awesome, make it great, make people stick around because of that one experience and then go from there.
Terrific.
Yeah, one of my questions that I'm thinking about is, so this is great. Like you're going through each step, and I like how it's almost like micro steps, right? Because I think normally we would just look at like, oh, it's only 5 screens, 3 screens.
Exactly.
Right, but the micro steps, I mean, that's interesting to capture. Ooh, that's the actual friction we're creating. I also wonder, like, for an existing product to do an audit like that makes a lot of sense. I also kind of makes me think, like, is there ever a time to just time out, let's reimagine, let's just map out job to be done, like first interview steps in between, that we kind of talked about, and reimagine what that experience might look like from the ground up.
For sure. I mean, I think that's a scenario where like I've seen that scenario happen twice in 2 scenarios. One is like where there's absolutely nothing, where they just drop you into the experience, like where they're like, it's a blank canvas and that's totally what you want to do. And the other one is we worked with this company. I don't want to say who, but they had 83 steps to get people to that first value. And I'm like, 83 steps, man. Like, let's start from scratch. I don't want to mark like, like the teacher with the red pen and just like, this is not good. Like, let's just start from scratch. And totally to your point, like, what are they really trying to do? What does success look like? And then once you have that, the second thing you want to ask is, what is the minimum number of features or things they need to do, or what is the minimum number of fields they need to fill out to get them to their success? And let's start with that. And then you start like discussing around, well, now you have a baseline to around the discussion, whether is this the quote unquote, and I know I don't want to be those guys, but the minimum viable onboarding, that minimum onboarding experience to get people to experience that first value. Is this what it is? And really driving home that point with that.
So it's like you're removing steps, but then you're also looking at that value that they want to get to. And what I heard you kind of say is sometimes you have to negotiate that. Like, can they actually get to that big value? And if they can't, can we break that down into a subcomponent that's reachable? Because I think 83 steps feels like insanity. And are they too aspirational? And yeah, we could teach them in an hour. We could teach them in a day. It's like, maybe you can't. Can you teach them enough to where they'll come back tomorrow and pick up at 25% progress to value and keep going? For sure.
Yeah. I was just, sorry, Ramli, I was just going to say that, if I was doing Calendly, probably designing Calendly myself, like ground zero, I would have thought to myself, well, the major steps are like account creation and sent first, booked first meeting. And man, I was actually realizing that there's a really high anxiety level to inviting someone else to a platform you're not familiar with. Like, I think this requires a different type of thinking to say what would make them feel comfortable, because it's an anxiety. It's like an empathy conversation then, right? What would make them feel comfortable? Oh, if they booked with themselves, and if you can anchor, I think to me that's the biggest art in this whole thing. Is like, what is that first interview, right? What does comfort look like? What is, a taste of success look like? And if we can agree on that, then I think it becomes an exercise of like beginning with the end in mind and backing your way out or into that, which I think would make it a lot easier, right? Because you think about, well, geez, how am I going to design this website? What are the steps? I mean, it's overwhelming. I could do it a million different ways, but if you're anchoring in that first interview that you've talked about,
right?
Ramli, I have one question in my mind, and maybe we can close on this. And I don't want it to go down a rabbit hole necessarily, so more of just your opinion. But in getting the first value, you've given us all these kind of approaches and things to think about. Where do trials fit in on this for you with onboarding? Sort of general, like, do you lean into that? Do you lean away from those, and why in terms of getting to a good onboarding experience?
And when you mean by trials, like free trials, like signing up?
Free trials, yeah, I should have been more specific. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge so there's usually two types. In general, there's two types of trials. There's the time-based trial, where like you give them like 7, 14 days. That's probably the most popular, and 99% of trials are usually time-based. There is one that's interesting that has risen because of the whole product-led movement, called usage-based trials, where the trial doesn't end, not based on time, but based on the number of times they finally use a product. An example I can think of is AppQues. AppQues is this onboarding tool that allows you to create tours and different things like that. And the tour, the trial ends when 100 of your customers or 100 of your website visitors have seen the tour that you've created as a trial, and that's when the trial ends. I think that's an interesting thing that I need to experiment more in terms of like getting data from other folks, because like that really does get to the point of like, sure, I can sign up for a 7-day trial, but do you actually use it? Like, how many of you have signed up for a trial where like, oh man, Rob or Ryan told me to sign up for this. I don't know what this is about. I'm gonna go sign up for it. You actually don't use it. Versus now, where you're really like, we're not successful until somebody actually uses our product. Super, super risky in that sense. Where now you don't have like time based. We're like, oh, your 7-day trial is done. But I think it goes back to the point where like, can you drive people to see that value sooner? And I think just rule of thumb for most products, usually within 3 days, like at least get them to that one quick win would be super, super big. The data I've seen across the board from B2C and B2B is after 3 days, you've usually lost somebody already. Even for HubSpot, where you're like any kind of B2B where it requires setting up something, because like I don't even remember what I ate for lunch 3 days ago, like much less like yesterday. So like I don't remember what I signed up for 3 days ago, and then I'm getting this email. I was like, what is this app that I signed up? Why are they sending me emails? I don't quite remember. So I think that's just something that I've seen is like, you want to really be driving home, whether it's freemium, free trial, or anything else. Like you really want to get them to a quick win within the product within that time frame.
Yeah, amazing. That's well, Ramli, like this chat truly amazing. I know Ryan and I taking notes. We're gonna try and fold some of these learnings into our practice. Ramli, where can people like find your book? Where can they find you? Like, what's the best way to stay in touch with us and our community?
For sure. I mean, they can find me on Twitter. I'm super active there at Ramli John, and LinkedIn as well. Feel free to email me if you have any questions, ramli@productled.com. And my book you can find at onboardingbook.com, and they can check out the first chapter for free. If they like it, then they can get the book for like $5-10 on Amazon everywhere. So it's called Product-Led Onboarding, and that's now available in any Amazon store anywhere.
Awesome.
Well, this has been great.
On the book. Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, Ramli, thanks so much for joining us. Yes, big congrats, join Rob and that on the book. This was a really great discussion. We covered a lot of great things, from customer segmentation. We talked about, an art and a dance, and how wonderful and how important that onboarding really is. It's made us kind of rethink, hey, how do we work with startups, and how do we find out what that first nugget of value might be and work customers towards. So Ramli, thanks so much for joining us, and be sure to check out Ramli's site, follow him on Twitter, and check out his new book, Product Onboarding. Thanks, Ramli.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Rob, Ryan.